In today's video, we're gonna test out a Switch emulator called Yuzu on the OLED Steam Deck. What's great about emulating Switch games on a handheld device like this is you have the option to bump the resolution up, which you can't do on a Switch. You have to dock the Switch to unlock a higher resolution. And sometimes you can even get better frames per second out of this, other times, not so much. But that's what we're here for. We're gonna test out 4 different games, and we're gonna try them at 720p and 1080p, and a couple of them we adjust some settings to fix some flickering and other problems like that. But that's it, pretty straightforward, so we're gonna jump into it. Here we go. We're gonna launch Yuzu, and then I'm gonna show you here what version it is, which is 1694. The first game that we're gonna check out is A Short Hike. This is a fun, easy to play game. Here are all the settings that I have inside of Yuzu if you want to check those out. But we're going to do this first at the handheld mode, which puts it at 720p resolution. I thought we'd be seeing a solid 60 frames per second at 720p from this game, but it seems to be kind of struggling here to stay in the 40 to 45 frames per second, even dipping into the high 30s. So it's absolutely playable. I just thought it was going to do a little bit better than this, so maybe some of the settings need to get tweaked to get that a little bit better. As much as I'd like to be getting higher frames per second, in reality, if I just turned all that off and just played the game, I wouldn't even be thinking about it. With that said, we're going to bump up to 1080p, which I understand this is an 800p monitor, but there is a noticeable difference when you jump from 720 to 1080p in text specifically, but everything else as well. And honestly, jumping up to 1080p doesn't seem to be hitting it too hard. Like, we're still seeing that now it's like a low 40 and hitting the high 30s. But in terms of just playability, and if you're not just staring at the frames per second counter, it feels pretty much the same, but looks way better. I would definitely play this in the 1080p version. But now I'm gonna try to lock the frames per second at 40 hertz on the Steam Deck and see if that can help us get a little bit more of a consistent frames per second out of this game. And what do you know? That made a huge difference. We're just locked in at 40 frames per second, no problem at 1080p. So yeah, I think I would definitely just do 1080p at 40. You could try going a little higher than 40 frames per second, but again, this game runs and feels flawless at 40 frames per second. I don't really need any more out of it. It's just fun to play, and that's what we're looking for. So yeah, easy peasy, no mods or anything needed. Next up is Hollow Knight. This game is so much fun. We're gonna kick things off at 720p and see how everything runs. I've actually played about 18 hours of this game on the Steam Deck with the Yuzu emulator, and it's been a flawless experience. I have no complaints. We're not completely pinned at that 60 frames per second, but it is certainly not having much of an issue here running this game at a pretty consistent 60 frames per second. There's just dips every once in a while, which does happen a lot just in emulation in general. I think it's safe to say that 720p is not that big of an issue, so we're gonna jump back in here, switch it over to that 1080p, and see what we can get out of the OLED Steam Deck. And it looks to be performing pretty much exactly the same. I'm not super surprised. This isn't a super difficult game to run, and it emulates beautifully. At 1080p, we're still pretty much locked in at that 60 frames per second. Also, this game just looks so good on the OLED screen. This is a Switch emulated game that you can enjoy on the Steam Deck. It's not gonna suck your battery dry. You can bump up the resolution to 1080p and just enjoy it. Next on the list is Mario Wonder. We're gonna start things off at 720p and see what we can get. I haven't played this very much on the emulator, so every once in a while you're gonna see some major dips and it's gonna get slow, but that's actually more to do with that I've just never done that action before, so it's building the cache or whatever, the shaders, the thingy-maboggers, to make it run better the next time you do that. So any of these games that you play more and more, the better they run. With all that said, it is staying in the high 50s and 60 for most of the time. There are some dips. So We're gonna see how it does if we jump it up to 1080p.
Oh, hey there. Hi. Remember me? Yeah, I'm sure you do. Because you keep coming back, but you don't subscribe. And I don't know why you're doing this to me. So just hit that subscribe button and enjoy the video. Thanks for being here. Goodbye.
It's like it's right there. It really wants to just lock in at that 60 frames per second, but it dips into the high 50s. And again, every once in a while, we're still experiencing some pretty major dips all the way into the 30s. But it's not that noticeable when you're playing. It's still a good experience playing this game. And even at 1080p, it's doing a great job. I wanted to make sure to grab this again so that all these intensive graphics would come on the screen, because as you notice, it is dipping the frame rate quite a bit, but still very playable. All right, last but not least, we're gonna check out Pokemon Violet. Again, starting at 720p, make things as easy as possible. And oh my gosh, right away we're having some major flickering visual issues. So I'm actually gonna jump back in the settings and see if maybe we could change one thing that might fix this major issue that's going on right now. All right, so back in Yuzu, if you just right click on it, go to the properties, and then under CPU, it just has it on auto, which is what it says it recommends. But we actually need to set it to unsafe, which makes it feel like so bad, like you shouldn't do this, but we should, because it's gonna fix this major issue that's going on from what they're recommending that we do in this game. And voila, fix the issue. Okay, now we can proceed with this little test. At 720p, the game seems to be running pretty well. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't capping the game, but in fact, the game itself is capped at 30 frames per second. You could probably get a mod if you wanted to try to go higher than that, but I'm okay with the 30 frames per second. I don't think we're going to get much more than that anyways. There's still little flickering happening every once in a while. Another quick little test I wanted to try was pinning the GPU much lower so that maybe the CPU could get a little bit more juice. So I'm gonna go like way down to 400 and see what happens. This doesn't really seem to be affecting that much at all. Again, we're only gonna get 30 frames per second max anyways. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's worth it. It's not making it better. It's not making it that much worse. If battery life matters to you, then this makes sense. But I typically never am thinking about battery life. There might be like a minor difference in the frame rate here, a little bit worse, but not that big of a difference. That was interesting, but I'm gonna turn it back off and I'm gonna frame limit to 30 frames per second. Okay, I feel like we jumped through a few different settings here. So we're just at 720p, 30 hertz in unsafe mode. And yeah, playable for sure. Doesn't seem to have many issues. Every once in a while there's a little graphical glitch, but not so bad, not like it was before we went into the CPU unsafe setting. I would definitely give this the stamp of approval. This is certainly playable on the Steam Deck at 30 frames per second, which means now we need to see what it's like at 1080p. Can this sustain that 30 frames per second at the higher resolution? Also, for reference, here are all the settings that I have in Yuzu. If anybody has suggestions or better settings, please leave a comment, because it's really helpful for myself and everyone else in the community to be kind of checking notes with one another as we just keep refining these systems until we find what is the best. All right, with that, we're gonna go to docked mode, which puts it into 1080p, and we're gonna jump back in the game. It seems to be doing about as good as it was doing at 720p, which is great news because, again, just that little bump in resolution really helps on the small details like the map and all the text and everything like that. So if this is playable at 1080p, I would probably opt in to that setting just for those benefits. Make sure to also leave comments on what other games you want to see emulated on the Steam Deck and if there's any specific settings that you would like to see as well.